Welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph, a behavioral. What am I anyway? Let's try that again.
There's an outtake.
Yeah. An organizational behavior scholar interested in all the things in our brains and hearts that make us tick or stop our positive, beneficial clocks from ticking the way we want them to. Today, we're going to continue our series on building psychological safety within ourselves, in our teams, and for our organizations. And we're going to continue the theme of the trade-offs involved in setting boundaries. I'd like to start with a story. So, a number of years ago, I had a leadership position that required me to work with amazing team members to support them in doing their work as best as possible, but also support them in supporting other people doing their work as best as possible. And one day I had the challenge of having a meeting with a very wonderful colleague who was not working with the other teammates as I thought they should. And I put together a plan to let them know this. And in management parlance, it's called performance management. Kind of always hated that euphemism, but the idea is there's a goal or a way we'd like you to work. There's a standard of how we'd like you to work. And in my job, it was my perspective that this person was not working to that standard. So my job was to highlight that mismatch, suggest a plan for doing it better, seek the colleagues' input on how they think they might do it better, and collaborate to agree on next steps. It's a really hard conversation to have because it often includes consequences if they don't meet those next steps, which is why I always sort of hated the performance management euphemism. But the consequences could include, getting written up, getting demoted, getting fired. It's real. Consequences could also include getting promoted, other good things happening if they change their behavior. So anyway, I went into this meeting with a little bit of trepidation, but weirdly a ton of calm because I just knew that what I was going to be asking this colleague to do was right for the organization, was right for the other people in the organization. And as it turned out, my colleague was really upset, a bit angry, started crying. And normally I would have just expected myself to feel all wobbly inside and kind of insecure myself and sort of wishing I could backtrack or backpedal. And I just felt calm and I felt compassionate and I felt clear and I felt confident. And I wasn't a jerk, but I just stayed present and held the line for what I thought was right. And I had a frame, which was, this was right for the organization. This was right for the team. So what surprised me so much about this was that I'm kind of a people pleaser, much more than I'd like to be. I've been working on that really hard for the last few years, and I would say I'm less of that. But generally, I'm very afraid of doing anything to degrade a relationship with someone or weaken a relationship. And I tend to, or I have in the past, traded away things that are important to me for a thing that was more important to me, which was the relationship. But gradually, over the years, I've come to dread feeling like a chump or feeling like I'm compromising myself as much or more as I fear losing the relationship. And so that theme is what we're going to explore a little bit today and its role in psychological safety. Why are we talking about boundaries and setting boundaries and tolerating the reaction to setting boundaries in a set of episodes about psychological safety? It's because I think if you feel wobbly inside regarding setting a boundary, that wobbliness, that upset, that possible emotional flooding is going to be contagious to other people on the team, and it's going to make you act in unpredictable or inconsistent, might be better ways, because you may say one thing that such and such a standard is important to you and then do another. And that lack of predictability, lack of consistency undermines a sense of pride and trust in yourself and allowing yourself to create psychological safety for yourself. And then also, I believe it can leak into when you interact with a single other person or your team. So why does this come about? I wanted to just dip in a little bit to some of the research, and I guess it's really theory that developed over many years of family systems therapy and the work of somebody named Murray Bowen, who in some ways is the father or a parent of family systems therapy. And one of the things that Murray Bowen noticed was that families come into homeostasis, by which he meant families start interacting in ways that feel balanced, predictable, and the way things are. In fact, sticking with that balance, even if it is an unbalanced balance, it could include yelling and screaming and at the very worst, and abuse of different sorts, but it's a known balance. That's what he meant by balance, not a idealized balance. And keeping that balance and way things are is so important that another educational psychologist, Bob Keegan, often talked about disrupting balances like that as heresy, or the equivalent of religious heresy, which is where you speak about a truth that you see or you believe, but goes against the religion of the family. So one of the things that Murray Bowen noticed was that when he started working with families and helping them connect with their authentic voice, each one of them, or their authentic sense of what was right, even if it started pushing the family in a good direction that was going to be allow for greater connection, more fun, less drama, less trauma, often families would back away from that initially. And he found that very perplexing, but he gradually came to realize that destabilization of a known bad balance, destabilization of a known bad homeostasis is scarier and more threatening than moving toward an unknown good balance. So I just want us to kind of hold this idea in the background for a moment as we think about setting boundaries. Harriet Lerner was a psychologist who wrote an amazing book, 30 years ago, 35 years ago now, maybe 40, called The Dance of Anger. And she built on Murray Bowen's work and looked at how when you attempt to set boundaries, it can be very destabilizing for your interactions with your spouse or your loved one or your sister or your brother or your mommy or your daddy or your child, for all the reasons that Murray Bowen noted. But what she did was she made his theory highly applicable. And she said, when you change anything in a system, and by the way, the only way to change things in the system is to change yourself. Can't go around changing other people, never works. And one of the ways that you change things in a system is you say, I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do that. Other people in the system are going to engage in what she called change back reactions. Those tend to be getting you to go back to the way you were. So an example from her book that I always found very compelling is a wife and a husband were living together. The husband was an alcoholic and went to the bar every night and got drunk. And she was worried about his driving home and getting in an accident. So she went and picked him up at the bar every night. And one day in the course of her work with Harriet Lerner or whomever, she realized that she couldn't be part of that anymore, and that what she was going to tell her husband was she wasn't going to be picking him up at the bar anymore because, well, just because. And his change back reaction was initially not to believe her and to call her repeatedly from the bar and yell and scream at her on the phone. And this was in the olden days of something called a payphone. They pick up on the wall and call, but she wouldn't come. And then eventually he started driving home, weaving all over the place, crashing into lamp posts and whatnot, and saying, look how unsafe this is. You're making me so unsafe, et cetera. So those are examples of change back reactions. And she just stood firm and said, I'm sorry, I'm not picking you up. Using a sort of broken record approach. Sorry, I'm not picking you up. Sorry, I'm not picking you up. So when we set boundaries, the reason I'm talking about homeostasis and I'm talking about change back reactions is, as I thought about this episode, I couldn't come up with a readiness goal initially. And it was because I find this terrain kind of scary and difficult. Because when I am afraid to set a boundary, I feel really afraid to set a boundary. And yet I realized there were many situations, like the story I told of working with my colleague, where I felt just totally comfortable and calm, and come what may, I would just weather the storm. And what I realized is that there are two things going on when we set a boundary. There's the destabilization of the existing agreements or homeostasis or whatever it is. And that in and of itself, at least for me, and I think many of the humans, is scary. It's heresy. And then the second thing that makes it even more complex, I realized, is often when we set a boundary, not always, but often when we set a boundary, we are trading off a weakening or a change in the relationship with the other person. Certainly my fear as a people pleaser is I'm going to lose the relationship with the other person, or I'm going to degrade it enough that they're not going to like me or love me or care about me or whatever my worries are anymore. Or I'm going to feel like a chump. So I'm either going to lose something in the relationship or I'm going to lose something in myself. So the risk of upending the apple cart of homeostasis plus the scariness of potentially weakening a relationship add up for many people, including me, into like running the other direction rather than set a boundary.
Jenny, I'm in a artists fellowship this year in 2026, and one of the things that they're having us do is read a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, which is interesting in that it's actually very similar to this podcast. It's a series of weekly exercises about unblocking your creativity. But the second week is all about this, and particularly this idea that creatives tend to surround themselves with other creative people, and many creative people are blocked in many ways, often by self-destructive behavior. The idea of the suffering creative is so pervasive for a reason. It's like you're suffering because you act in ways that actually block you, but you think that they are what are fueling your work. And that when someone starts to act in a more internally coherent way and heal in some ways and like start to unblock themselves, what often happens is the community around them says like, wait, you can't change, like, because we're all still blocked, and they start to engage in exactly these kinds of like change back behaviors. It's like, come back to the way you were, come suffer with us. It's just really, really fascinating how much this is resonating with something that I'm actively doing right now as part of this program.
Wow, that's fascinating. And that's another whole type of change back reaction, James. When I'm in a couple or I'm in a friendship or I'm in a work relationship, my actions have an impact potentially on that one other person or the team. But you're saying, hey, there's a normal way for us to be in this community together. I'm sure middle schoolers, I'm sure you and I both suffered from this, like, don't be different from all the other middle schoolers. Don't be different
I
from all
imagine we both did. Yeah.
yeah, don't be different from all the other artists. That's another type of pressure that we can endure. Yeah. So I've really struggled with how do I get myself to a place where I can set a boundary in a way that doesn't cause panic for my internal system. And what I've done over these last 2 episodes for myself, and I hope for many of you, is to kind of unpack this. So step 1 that we talked about last week is, what are the trade-offs? What am I going to lose if I set the boundary? What am I going to lose if I don't set the boundary? And in general, I've landed on what I've shared so far, which is it's often losing something regarding the relationship, or that's what I fear, or losing something about myself. By the way, as a parenthetical note, I've had a couple really deep, well, let's not call them deep, profound, difficult conversations in my life, many more than a couple, but 2 where this happened, where it was really, really high stakes. And by setting a boundary and negotiating clearly with the other person, I actually deepened my relationship with them. The other person understood me better. I understood them better. And we came out of it respecting each other even more than before. So I just want to say that can happen. But a lot of times it's scary to get there. So now that we understand the anxiety, that it could be about destabilizing the homeostasis, could be about the loss of relationship, could be about loss of self. This is where we bring psychological safety in. So the regular definition of psychological safety is this environment is safe for interpersonal risk taking. So what I'm trying to do when I build this psychological safety for myself and am trying to project it into a duet with somebody else is I have to learn to tolerate my own anxiety in the service of setting or attempting to set this boundary. And I think a good way for us all to get there is not trying to lift the heaviest weight first, but starting with a lighter weight in our reps. And I hark back to Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy's wonderful idea of a safe, modest test. And Keegan and Leahy talk about safe, modest tests as a way for you to do something in the world that disproves your existing belief system, or treating your fears essentially as a hypothesis. So I want to say a little bit behind this, and then we're going to come to our workout of the week. When a part of me panics at the thought of setting a boundary, I believe what's going on is I'm running some very old software, probably from when I was a kid, who knows. But that software makes me believe that if I somehow erode a relationship in any way, that is a matter of survival for me. And if that belief arose when I was a young toddler or a young child, that was probably a reasonable hypothesis. But I'm not that age anymore. I'm a pretty strong, centered, grounded human. And I think many of you listening to this are also. So we all kind of need to update our software a little bit by doing these safe, modest tests. And so a safe, modest test can generate new data. It's not going to radically change anything, but it's going to be something that you try to make something work. So here's some examples of safe, modest tests that I've actually run myself. So one is I prefer that meetings start on time. I'm certainly not always on time myself, and understand if other people want to start them on time. But a safe, modest test I've run is I'm starting this meeting or this class on time, regardless of whether everybody's here or not. And I'm going to see, does the world come to a crashing halt if some important other is not there yet? Or on the other end of the meeting, I've had people not respect the end of the day. And when I had to pick up young kids at daycare, that was really not an okay thing for me. So another safe, modest test I've done many times is, regardless of when this thing finishes, I'm leaving. Or I'm leaving at the top of the hour as appointed. So, building on those kinds of ideas, our workout of the week for you that we recommend you try is to identify one safe, modest test where you can experiment with setting a boundary. It shouldn't be something where if you set the boundary and then you hold the boundary, some major thing is going to happen, like you lose your job or you lose a relationship. Even if you fear that you're going to lose your relationship and that's irrational, pick something where if somebody else gets upset and starts with the change back reactions, they may not be too big and or you're ready to withstand them. So our workout of the week, one more time, identify one safe, modest test where you can experiment with setting a boundary. James, I usually don't do this, but I just want to check in with you. Any thoughts on this workout of the week? Do we have enough detail for people to know what to do?
Yeah, I think so. I was thinking of an example for me, which was in meetings, when we are starting to creep outside of the scope of the meeting. We are doing stuff that isn't on the agenda, or we are talking about things that don't need to be addressed today when there are things that need to be addressed today. I will often say something along the lines of, "Hey, I don't think this is on the agenda for this meeting. Can we table it for another time?" And that is hard boundary setting, and it's difficult to do. But I was also telling you, Jenny, before we started this recording, this is my episode because I think I'm very good at this stuff.
Absolutely, James. I have experienced that about you over many years. And as I also said before the show, you're a role model for it. So I agree with you. Well, thank you for spending time with Curious Now. Curious Now is produced at the Center for Medical Simulation and directed and edited by James Lipshaw. If you've liked what you've heard here, you might want to consider our personal leadership coaching service. You might also be interested in our Simulation Leader intensive course launching this August 2026. You also might be interested in our consulting and other training that works with leaders across the healthcare system to help them bring high performance teams, culture change, and readiness to everything they do.